Yes. Yes. So let's start a little bit. I want to know about yourself a little bit before you become a professional. What drove you when you were at a young age to painting, to drawing? Did you love horror films before drawing the posters? Before you become a professional?
Yeah, I think that really my interest began when I was watching television in the 1960s, early 1960s as a child. They had a program called Doctor Who, which I think is pretty well known now. American TV series like The Munsters and The Addams Family, Lost in Space. They all had sort of slightly odd, creepy themes, and I always found them quite attractive for some reason. And I guess I was an unusual child in that respect. But I think when I was in my probably early teens, I began reading a lot more,
Mm-hmm.
and I became aware of. They started showing all the Universal horror films on TV at the time, all the black and white films, and then they began showing some of the Hammer horror films as
Mm-hmm.
well. And I always was quite fascinated by the imagery in the films and all the monsters, and I wanted to know more about them. So I started reading the original novels, like Frankenstein, Dracula, and Hunchback of Notre Dame. You know, for a young man, these were quite intense pieces of literature, and probably most of the concepts were, you know, over my head at the time. I've reread most of these books now, and of course, in the context of the time they were written, they're much richer than, you know, the surface detail, because there are obviously other things going on, you know, sort of social commentary, etc. And for me, that's always been quite interesting about horror, and so really, I guess my interest is really from the literature, but also film posters themselves. I remember watching, you know, or seeing rather, film posters outside the local cinema in the West Country, which is where I'm from originally, so the south of England, southwest of England, and being quite fascinated by the artwork. And you know, of course, this is all hand painted work at the time.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about, you know, 1970s, and you know, a lot of the American films, the big disaster films, have these incredible um, painted posters. In fact, if you can see
Mm-hmm. Of
one of
course,
the
I've
I'm the
seen.
Hindenburg.
Yes, I've been recognizing George C. Scott above you.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's one of my favourite films, and the poster in particular was what drew me in.
Mm.
And so I went to art college at the age of 16
Mm-hmm.
to study graphic design,
Mm-hmm.
and did that for 3 years. And within the latter part of the course, realised that most of my solutions were involved some sort of form of imagery, painting, or whatever, or drawing. And so I did a fourth year where I specialised in illustration work and learned my techniques and developed my style. And so in 1980, left art college and moved to London to seek my fortune. I didn't find it, but I'm still in London.
Yeah. Um, when you mentioned Doctor Who, I remember myself watching on Egyptian television. You know, we used to get a lot of classic stuff from England and the States. And I remember a very nice anthology television series. Maybe you remember it. It was called Thriller. Do you remember seeing this?
I do. Yes,
It,
yes.
it had excellent stories, and I until now I still remember it. You know,
Well, I think the
and
names.
great actors, great writers. It was
That's
like
right.
the British Twilight Zone
That's
and
right.
Outer
Yes. Well, it was
Limits.
written by Brian Clemens, of
Yeah.
course, who created the Avengers TV series, and
Yes.
always they're amazing TV series. And in fact, he directed one Hammer horror film, which was Captain Kronos. He wrote that as well.
Yes.
So they all had quite dark themes. In fact,
Of
what
course.
yeah, a lot of interesting actors of the era.
Yeah.
You could almost tell it's a bit like watching the Avengers TV series that at any given episode, you almost had an idea of what was being filmed at Pinewoods down the road, because whatever was shooting there, that actor was probably available for a few days' work or a
Yes.
morning's work, whatever, and so they'd be shoehorned into the series. And I think that happened with Thriller as well. That whatever was shooting nearby, if they could get that person for a day, then they had a star. But of course, Thriller was interesting because it was partly funded by America. So they always shoehorned in one American actor or actress
Yes.
for their remit. And I do remember, I don't know if you have, there's a box set of DVDs you can buy, which has the entire series
Mm-hmm.
and also gives you the alternative title sequences at the beginning and end, which were made different for America and
Mm-hmm.
usually shot in America to give some sort of sense of an American kind of setting, although of course they're all shot in Britain and
Yes.
actually
Mm-hmm.
and just completely not American at all.
Yes.
And actually, the other joy of Thriller was spotting the same props and throughout the different episodes, because
Yes.
although the settings would be different, it
Yeah.
would always be the same grandfather clock, the same tumbler of whiskey.
Yes, because at that time I remember also in the States I read that they used to sometimes use some props from films that finished shooting instead of constructing new props, new decor set, you know, especially for not for television as well, and yes, I think this kind of anthology, you know, influenced a lot of filmmakers later on until now.
Yeah,
It featured a lot of great writings, and sometimes they used to adapt some excellent short stories as well, not directly written for television. Mm?
absolutely. Well,
Mm.
one of the other, I guess, film companies I was drawn to quite early was Amicus as well, who of course set up to rival Hammer,
Mhm.
and they specialise in anthology films, of course, and so I remember, particular episodes of those were almost like mini films in themselves, and again with great character actors. So you had Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee, but
Of
also,
course.
of course, Tom Baker, who played Doctor Who, and all these other very interesting characters who just, were available for an afternoon or a morning or whatever, so they can be bought quite cheaply, just to make these very short films.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, some very unusual people. Terry Thomas, who was famous for his comedic work, was drafted in for one of the stories, and yeah, it's just a fantastic little hodgepodge of ideas and creativity. I
Yes.
mean, of course, most of that work was written by Chetwynd Hayes, who has a huge body of short story work, all very very dark and creepy, but perfect writing for Amicus though to draw on.
Believe it or not, I watched yesterday a film. It was premiered in Sundance beginning of the year, January, and it was produced by Hammer. Can you believe it? They started to come back and produce films. It's called The Lodge. Actually, it was a very good film.
Right. Is
Uh,
that the one with Christopher Lee?
no, it's produced this year. It's a new film and produced by Hammer, because I know they stopped production a long time ago and they started to re-release their films again, you know, on online, on Blu-ray, DVD, stuff like that.
Of
Started to
course.
discover the old lot, like they say. But
Yeah.
really, it was the film was written by two young ladies and co-produced by Hammer, and it premiered this year in Sunday. It's called The Lodge. The Lodge. Very good
Uh,
film, actually.
is this the one with um, each of the characters, each of the actors directs the segments within the
No, it's
film?
one film. It's a feature film.
Yeah,
It's a feature
but it's
film. It's one story, not an anthology. But it was co-written by two young ladies, I
Mhm.
think Europeans. Hmm? And
Interesting.
the movie, it is about, you know, a young lady. She's married. She will be married to to uh, to a man, and he leaves her a couple of days in a remote area where it snows completely, you know, in a remote house like the Shining house, with
Mhm.
his two young kids. And these two young kids are still missing their mother who committed suicide. And then the most of the film takes place inside the house with the woman and the two kids, you know. It's very claustrophobic. Very nice
Right.
film. I was surprised they still do really good horror films until now.
Oh, right. I mean, that was interesting because I was getting confused because I did a post for a film called The Lodge
Of course.
last year
Mm-hmm.
or the year before maybe, which was an anthology
Film.
film,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and but that was a female writer director. And but then when Hammer first started making films, for instance, Wake Wood was I think one of the and Let Me In. And the first one they did was I think it was called something like The Lodger, which
Yes.
did
The
have
Lodge.
Chris Ridley's last
Mm-hmm.
appearances. So that's why I was slightly confused when you mentioned Hammer and then The
Yes.
Lodger. I will seek out the film. It sounds very interesting.
Yeah,
Anyway,
try to see it. It was just released like last week online.
yeah.
Yes. But tell me, when you work on a film, do you need to see the whole film or only to see the trailer?
Um, Generally speaking, nowadays I will see the whole film.
Mm.
In the past, in the
Mm-hmm.
1980s, for
Mm-hmm.
instance, I'd often be sent a VHS copy of the film.
Yes.
Occasionally, it might just be the trailer,
Mm-hmm.
and very occasionally, it might literally be nothing more than a series of transparencies or black and white stills to work
Mm-hmm.
from because they had no materials at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, what often happens now is that because most of the film work I do is it's independent film work. It's not big studio work.
Mm-hmm.
So generally speaking, I'll be sent to Vimeo, which will
Yes.
quite often be and before the sort of final
Yeah.
touches, you know,
Mm-hmm.
effects, music, sound, grading. So it'll be an early cut, a rough cut of the film,
Mm.
and that's quite normal right now. Other than that, if it's a reissue of a film for Blu-ray or DVD, then usually I'll be sent either well, quite often, sometimes a disc, but mostly it will be again a Vimeo link. So
Yes.
I'll be able to watch the film that way. And actually, if it's a Vimeo link, usually I can make screen grabs from the film, you know, pause it, take an image, and then use that, incorporate that as my reference
Mm-hmm.
for the final image.
Yes.
Um, and then occasionally, directors have the foresight to actually ensure they're making good photography whilst they progress the shoot,
Mm-hmm.
so that there a series of very good quality images of the main talents, which I can then use as my reference as well. I mean that's really one of those things that occasionally I might get asked in an interview, what advice would I give a young director? And I always say, take a lot of photographs when you're shooting a film because
Mm-hmm.
they're going to be useful for the posting.
Yes, because I remember most of the time right now, I think on location to release photos from the film, they take caption from the film itself, you know, during the editing or after the editing process. But I remember because I worked 5 years in distribution 25 years ago, we used to receive these photos, black and white photos, you know, and they were usually taken by a photographer who was on set. And sometimes they used to do a very good job, you know, capturing close-ups and certain
Yeah.
frames that you wouldn't see in the film.
But you do see that from sort of some of the classic films that are from the
Yeah.
50s and beyond. But when you look at I mean, I'll always go back to Hammer because they're an interesting case because they did, although they didn't always take a lot of photographs on set, they would actually take their actors to a studio and they'd be in costume, but they would light them to evoke the film. and you get these beautiful, very crisp, sharp images of the actors in character, which would then get used obviously for all the publicity, for the press and magazines, etc. And
Mm,
really, that's what it's all for. It's the press basically.
mm,
But now that means there's a good repository for people like me who,
mhm,
if they need to work on posters for those films, work or reimagine those posters, there is all that imagery to still draw from now. I mean, I was watching Hammer's Dracula
mhm,
last night, with view to working on a sort of limited edition poster, which has been commissioned. That will be a screen print, a full colour, and of Hammer's Dracula. They have a license for this film, so I'm just trying to look, again through what material is there, because what I always hate doing is always using the familiar material, where a film has three or four very well-known images. You always see those same images.
mhm,
So I always try to move away from those and try to do something a bit different.
mhm,
So I'm always looking at different moments to capture in a film, and because Christopher Lee's appearance in that original Dracula, there's not many appearances really of him. I mean, I think I read it's got about 6 minutes maximum of screen time in the entire film,
mhm,
so those scenes are quite quick, really.
mhm,
And there are two or three moments where you're very familiar with those close-ups of Christopher Lee. But I noticed at the very end there's one last shot, um, just before he meets his demise, which I think I'm going to try to use. I've got a good quality screen and a good quality Blu-ray, which of the restored film, which I'll literally have to take a camera and just
mhm.
photograph the screen. But I'm hoping I can get a fairly good quality image, and it will be an image that people aren't that familiar with. But nevertheless, the lighting's fantastic, and he looks
Mhm.
great in it.
Would you ever been approached to draw like comic book covers, adapting films, or directly comic book covers related in the genre? Huh?
I I have a couple of times, but it's an area that I've generally stayed away from,
Mhm,
because comic book work is it's a very skilled area, and it's not really the skill set that I have
mhm,
myself. Um, for me, I like to try to put everything into one image, to
of
say
course.
everything with one image.
Mhm,
And that's, to me, is what a film poster does. It tries to give you some sort of narrative
mm,
and some sort of sense of the story all in one single panel. Obviously, comic books are much like books in as much you have chapters, and you have sort of verses almost. And the whole way the narrative is told is so different.
mhm,
And it's the idea of just sitting there and just endlessly drawing panel after panel. When I just do the one,
mhm,
it just seems a bit mad to me. But I have done a couple of comic book covers. I did something very recently, about 2 years ago, for it was an extension of the Mummy concept from Hammer's original
mhm,
version, and they extended the idea for a comic, and it was presented as Hammer's The Mummy, with the subtitle, which was obviously the story within.
mhm.
And they had four different covers for that, and I did one of the covers. So that's the nearest I've actually got to doing comic book work.
Mm. Right now, there are awards for posters, for illustrations. Huh?
There are, sorry, awards.
Awards. Usually there are awards for posters or illustration, or there are few.
I think there have been in the past. There was a society of illustrators. There still is, the Association of
Mm-hmm.
Illustrators in Britain, and I think they participate in an award uh, kind of initiative. Um, I've always been outside of the mainstream of illustration work, really, um, and I have been lucky enough to get two recent awards, which are the Slaughters, which is a UK-based horror
Mm-hmm.
award. And one was really for, I guess, the body of work over my career. sort of an acknowledgement of my services to the horror industry as such. And then the second one was specifically for a book cover, which was a book called Into the Velvet Darkness, which was a book about Vincent Price's work in film, horror films. Um, so I did get an award for that. Of course, this is a horror community award, and really that's the best kind of award I can receive anyway,
Yes,
because it's the people I'm working for really.
yes, yes. Because what I was really thinking about that both illustration and film posters and also stunts in the film
Yeah.
should get recognition, in big awards like the BAFTA or the Oscars, because it's a very important part of the filmmaking, I think.
Well, it's true. It's one of those things I've always argued is that
Mhm,
even with fairly expensive productions, major productions, the posters are always the last thing to be considered,
mhm,
and it's at the point where the money doesn't exist anymore.
mhm,
So we've got a very limited budget for the poster, or having spent sort of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, on a film.
mhm.
And yet you think, well, really for the public who are coming to the film for the first time, the first the first entry point is going to be the image, which is
Of
the film
course.
poster. Obviously online you get trailers, etc., etc. But that poster image is really what is intended to entice the audience in. So you'd think that actually that would be quite an important part of anybody's consideration, but it does seem quite often posters are an afterthought
Yes.
on a film, and I think actually to the detriment of some films that they perhaps don't get the recognition that they might otherwise have had simply because the marketing does not support the film.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because I think, of course, many posters, sometimes they get more audience, even the film is not that good. Sometimes, and especially in the old days, we used not to have internet and online media like now. The poster, and myself, I like very much the teaser posters because they don't reveal a lot about the film, and
Yeah.
leave a very big space to the viewer imagination to try to imagine what is the film is about. But yourself, when you were studying and bit by bit become a professional, did you have certain artists or favorite artists who influence you in the poster drawing?
Yes, I did,
Mm,
and those would be really the people who were designing the posters for the cinema at the time
mm,
when I was at art college. So in terms of illustrated posters, of course, I mean, two of the biggest films when I was at art college were, Star Wars and
mm,
um, Close Encounters, and Raiders of the Lost Ark was after I left
mm-hmm.
college, but certainly a number of posters around that era, the illustrated posters, anyway, some of the James Bond posters, of course,
Of course.
were illustrated by people like Bob Peak and Drew Struzan, who, for many illustrators is still, the touchstone for artwork. And so, yeah, my work was influenced by those two in particular. Um, but then I was probably less aware of a lot of the other artists. A lot of the American film posters were um, painted by people who weren't specialists in that area.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so you had people, I mean, like the poster behind me, the Hindenburg, these were painted by artists who were working in other areas, generally had specialist areas. There are people who worked on, Western imagery, um, people who worked in Civil War artwork,
Mm-hmm.
people with specialist areas,
Mm-hmm.
and yet they would, they would
Did,
work in studios where they would have, other commercial work coming through. They did book covers and film posters, but it wasn't necessarily their area. But they produce this incredible artwork,
yeah.
and that's why people don't really know those names so well now. But there are a number of them. But what's interesting is it's the history of those artists, what inspired them to do the style of work that they did. And when you look at somebody like Drew Struzan, who's influenced so many illustrators of my generation, um, and still does, it's interesting who inspired him. Like J.C. Leyendecker, the American artist who was a contemporary of Norman Rockwell, and then Leyendecker himself was influenced by Alphonse Mucha, for instance. So you kind of see, it's interesting seeing the lineage, and for me, it's quite interesting to actually sometimes bypass the people who influenced me, actually go back to what influenced them to see what it was, what the alchemy was, if you like, that produced the posters that I love.
Yeah, and I remember there was a trend in posters at the late 70s, beginning of 80s, where you notice a lot of text on on the poster, especially in the States, I think, not in the UK. Uh, like a big text, a big paragraph on the poster. Do you remember that trend?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I've got a number of book of film posters, of course, because I'm obsessed by film posters, and yeah, it's interesting seeing how,
Mm.
you get very definite styles
Mm-hmm.
attached
Mm-hmm.
to, maybe a 2 year period, perhaps. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I think it's something that happens is that you'll see that a film has done very well at the box office, and so for the marketing teams, they will just want to emulate everything they can about that last box office success, and so they will try to emulate that poster style. And you'll just see that, you
Mm-hmm.
just will get over a period of 2 years, you get one style of poster which is predominant. It's because a particular film has done very well, and people just want to cash in on the perceived success. But of course, it doesn't always work like that, as they find out
Yes.
the next style will come along.
But in the UK, I think the printing of the posters, they used to be like landscape, not and
That's right.
until now, this technique is going
Yeah,
on.
we always designed what were called quad posters, which were
Mm.
40 inches by 30
Mm-hmm.
inches, and the American one sheet poster, which is
Mm-hmm.
the standard now, for many places, is essentially it's 40 inches by 27 inches,
Mm-hmm.
but then it's portrait
Vertical,
form.
yes.
But it's interesting because I designed a lot of quad posters in the 1980s, especially,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things was that the bottom 3 inches was always meant to be left for venue information.
Mm-hmm.
What they used to do was leave the bottom blank and then paste over. The cinema would paste over their own little strip at the bottom, saying now showing at
Mm-hmm.
ABC Streatham or wherever it might be, um, or you would ensure that no key imagery was in that bottom 3 inch area, maybe the credit block, which could then be covered over with a
Mm-hmm.
venue strip. So, in fact, the quad poster was actually 40 inches by 27 inches anyway,
Mm-hmm.
the extra 3 inches for venue information. So, bizarrely, the format is the same, it's just that one's landscape and one is portrait. But of
Yes.
course, most posters now are designed to be portrait. Um, when I do occasional private commissions,
Mm-hmm.
people ask for a quad format or a landscape format because it signifies films of an era,
Mm-hmm.
and so it has a sort of nostalgic kind of
Mm-hmm.
feel to
Mm-hmm.
it. I mean, to me, it was interesting. I think landscape posters seem to make more sense for cinema
Mm-hmm.
than
Yeah.
portrait, simply because the cinema screen
Of
is,
course. Yeah. Yeah.
it's the whole trick. It's designed to almost mimic the
Mm-hmm.
way you see things.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's logical that a film poster should emulate a cinema screen.
Mm-hmm.
However, what that is, it's quite simple.
Yeah.
Portrait of actors, you get a famous actor. It
Yeah.
needs that
It's
format
him. It's him.
let's go back.
Or her. Yeah. But I want to ask you yourself, when you work, what kind of paper do you use to draw
It's
on?
It's a watercolor paper.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a watercolor paint. I've over the years found one particular type which works for me very well.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite textured, which means that you can, when you use the brush over the top of the surface, you can use the texture of the paper to create effects.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but also, it's not that textured that you can also do fine paint
Mm-hmm.
work as well. Um, Also, it's thick enough that it doesn't buckle and disintegrate, but it's also sort of light enough I can actually roll the artwork afterwards for storing without damage to the paint surface. So it's like it's like a heavy paper, but it's designed for watercolor, so it
Mm-hmm.
has to be stretched onto a board. In fact, I'll show you.
Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
This is a piece I'm just about to
Yeah.
start working on. So
Mm-hmm.
because it's been taped onto the piece of wood,
Mm-hmm.
and this is the wash of colour that's put on. So that's just drying now, but it's perfectly flat.
Yes.
Um, but you can see when I put the wash on, um, the paper buckles, and so the paint sort of settles in ridges. So as it dries, you just get these almost like stripes of colour. And it's quite random the way the paint dries. Um, and so then I use that as the basis for my work.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a bit of randomness that happens to start with.
Yes, but it was tricky along the year to start to scan the surface after you finish. How do you manage to scan without, um, I mean, altering the the painting itself? How do you scan it?
Oh, I mean, for the actual final delivery,
Yeah.
um, I've got an A4 scanner.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, the size of that artwork there will probably need 4 or maybe 6 scans. Literally, you have something this size.
Yeah.
So you put the artwork on,
Oh.
and it's sort of hanging over the edge, and you move
Mm.
it along, scan
So
it
you scan
quickly.
it part by part because I know in publication there is what we call a drum scanner. You know, it's big one.
That's right.
Uh huh.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, traditionally, that everything was drum scanned. That's
Mm-hmm.
true. Um, all the early work I did was drum scanned, or it was photographed onto large format transparency. So literally with a rostrum camera, as it would be called,
Mm-hmm.
to have a high quality transparency to give you the best possible reproduction.
Mm-hmm.
Although that then would go onto a drum scanner anyway, though. But a lot of artists used to work on illustration board, which meant you didn't have to tape down the artwork. It would be on a very heavy piece of board, and then what you'd have to do if you didn't photograph it, um, if it was done carefully, and they used to do this all the time, is you would carefully um, take off that top layer of cardboard. You'd have to do it very carefully with a roller. It always terrified me that people did this, but it was quite common practice to do it. And bizarrely, artwork rarely got damaged. So
Mm-hmm.
and that was the standard way of you know um, reproducing the artwork. Of course, when I used to send off artwork
Mm-hmm.
for scanning, I rarely got the artwork back. So I've lost
Mm-hmm.
a lot of work over the
Original,
years.
original. Yeah.
Yes, however, since I've been scanning my own work, I've kept everything. So
Yeah. Because I think these art pieces they gain more nostalgia when time passes by. You know, they become
mm,
rare objects, and sometimes they are sold like a painting, or or memorabilia in the future. Hmm?
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, there's a healthy market for original artwork, film
Mm-hmm.
poster art.
Mm-hmm.
I myself have been selling, my own work as well.
Yes.
To collectors who might be in. I've got a collector in Italy, for instance, one
Mm-hmm.
in Spain, couple in America.
Mm.
So these are people who seriously collect film
Of
poster
course.
artwork, and of course it's a different now because
Mm-hmm.
my work is it's not it doesn't have the traditional qualities of, say, for instance, Drew Struzan's work or P. or the artists who create, um, very detailed photorealistic work. My work is not like that
Mhm.
really. So it's taken a while for the work that I do to have a sort of collector audience, if you like, um, and it's meant that I've been doing this now, well, since 1980, so we're talking about 40 years.
Mhm.
So it's taken 40 years for
Mhm.
some. Oh, that's not too bad after all.
Yes. Um, uh, do you know that here in Egypt we did a remake of the Rocky Horror Picture Show?
All right,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, it was very funny, because all the songs were replaced by Egyptian songs. So,
fantastic.
yeah, yeah. And of course, there are a lot of trial in Egypt in fiction and horror films, but they are not that popular. Usually people tends to see American or British films. But speaking of horror, yesterday also I was watching a Korean film called Train to Busan.
Yes, I know the film well. Yes.
Yeah, and because they are making a sequel will be released soon. And while watching it, I was comparing it really to this problem of coronavirus.
Ah,
Because really, I was saying that usually, film try to project stuff, to the future, and sometimes they exaggerate. But
mm,
really, when someone catches really corona, it's like getting bitten by a zombie, because it's
mm.
and it propagates around the world in a very fast way. It's really like this film or the Walking Dead series. So, do you think that this corona problem will inspire a lot of filmmaking in the future?
Oh, absolutely. Well, as you mentioned yourself, there have been a number of films which have addressed the subject of a pandemic,
Of course,
and I mean, 28 Days Later was,
of course.
was our nearest UK
Mhm,
equivalent of
mhm.
that thing. Certainly, I've just worked on a poster for as a private commission for Dawn of the Dead, which it seems like the most appropriate film poster
Yes.
to be doing right now because it is about human to human infection
Yes.
and attempts to isolate from that. But yeah, it's interesting. One of the high points of each year for me has always been in London. We have the London Fright Fest, UK's sort of premier horror film festival, and it's interesting. Each year, you'll pick up on a theme, and the theme, it's not an agreed theme, but filmmakers have obviously been influenced by the same things, and uh, there will be perhaps something about home invasion, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps one year, another year, it might have a sort of theme, which is, well, we mentioned contagion, for instance, but there's always some underlying theme which has some basis in some world event or the politics of the time, and I think the era of Trump has certainly influenced horror films in a big way, and I think that we're seeing issues over the fears of immigration in film as well, though that seemed to be a theme about 2 years ago. I noticed it in a lot of the horror films, and it's fear of the other, if you like, and so I think this will absolutely have an influence on films. We won't see them for 2 years probably because, well, firstly, nobody can really make a film because of the practical reasons. So that it could be another year before we see film production back in its full volume again. But certainly, and given the production time and post production, we're looking 2 years down the line. But I think we'll see a lot of virus based films.
Yes.
That'll
Okay.
keep me busy.
Thank you very much, huh, for this
My
nice
pleasure,
talk.
Sherry.
I hope it was nice. I enjoyed it very much.
Well, I enjoyed it as well. Thank you very much.